Welcome to Stories from the River, a show in which we go behind the scenes at Broad River Retail.
Welcome back to Stories from the River. This is Charlie Maloof. I'm here with my good friend and hopefully soon to be yours, special guest, DeAngelo Burse. DeAngelo, welcome to the pod.
I'm here, baby. I'm here.
Oh, it's so good to have you here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Well, DeAngelo, you're not a memory maker, but you came and spoke to our memory makers last month. And you and I first met you or saw you on a Zoom. We were trying to talk about when it was. It may be June 2020 during the event following George Floyd. You were on a panel with New City Church. I think you said it was called Blind Spots, right?
That's correct. Yeah, Blind Spots. I think that was right around 2020, right after George Floyd. And it was, if you can remember, the entire nation was trying to make sense of it. And so they reached out because of my background to kind of add some insight, give some insight about some of the things that we struggle with in terms of racial bias, cultural bias, and things like that. Yeah,
it was great. And so then once I saw you on that panel, and we certainly had some opportunities to engage with different speakers for different series we had, got you plugged in with our team, and they went through some of your sessions and really liked them and said, we got to get this guy in.
Yeah.
Then you and I think, met for coffee maybe in 2021, got to know each other a little bit better. And finally we were able to make it happen last month. It took a while.
That's right. We was courting for a while, man.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. But before we get into all of that, this is Stories from the River. Well, let's talk about your story, your unique story that brought you here today. So, DeAngelo, tell us a little bit about your background and who you are, where you're from, and your unique story.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we're going to get into this idea of narrative identity. So really that's what you're asking me about. You're asking me about my narrative identity, right? Let me start by saying, Charlie, that I beat the odds.
Okay.
You know, I beat the odds. I'm an odd beater.
Okay.
Right? Statistically, I probably shouldn't be sitting in front of you right now, you know, because I grew up in the streets, grew up poor, started carrying a gun when I was 16, saw my brother go to prison for second-degree murder.
Wow.
And so in that environment, and somehow, some way, I emerged out of that environment. And I'm sure that we'll get to talk about that. But I would say that it all changed in Nashville, Tennessee. When I moved there, saw some different people, heard some different perspectives, started studying philosophy, which ended up landing me in Charlotte to study philosophy at the undergraduate and graduate level. And then from there, I went on to study social psychology and for graduate studies, and did 2 postgraduate certifications in positive psychology. So there's a lot within that. If I keep going, you may not be able to ask your second question, but I'm sure that as this unfolds, man, we'll be able to unpack some of that.
Well, let me tease out a little bit on the story. Right. Where did you grow up on the streets?
Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Chattanooga. And how many siblings did you have?
So 2 brothers, older brother and a younger brother.
And was it your older brother you saw go to prison?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And you were carrying a gun at age 16.
Yeah, I taught myself how to shoot a gun with no parental supervision at about 12 or 13.
That's probably ill-advised.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah. And, my older brother and I shared a room. And so oftentimes I found crack, money, and even guns underneath his mattress.
Okay.
And so I'd take some money, steal some of the money, leave the crack because I didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. And then I go out in the backyard and I started practicing how to shoot a gun. I almost shot myself in the face once, just because I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, thank God that didn't happen.
Oh, thank God.
And so this is the environment you grew up in,
right,
which you're saying statistically said you should have fallen prey to the streets and everything else, but you didn't. You overcame the odds.
Absolutely, 100%.
And you moved to Nashville, Tennessee when? How old were you?
When I was 19.
And what precipitated that move?
Well, it was, for whatever reason, I was always conscientious. Maybe that's just a personality trait that I have. But it was, here's the deal, Charlie. Either I move or I go to jail or I end up dead, because that's exactly what was awaiting me based on the people I was around and the actions and activities and things that I was doing. Right.
That's how you looked at it. You said, I'm either going to stay here and either die, go to jail, or I got to move.
Absolutely, 100%. Walking outside of my high school, I recall vividly just this sense of purpose and meaning, and that I was called to do more with my life, and it never left.
Really,
I think I said it at the Elevate Your Purpose talk, that I was the guy in the back in the car smoking, saying, "Hey man, don't you guys think we're here for more? Right?
Yeah,
Shut up, D-Lo. We don't want to hear about that right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Got it.
We're high.
We need to understand where that calling came from. I'm really interested in knowing. Like, was this? So it was an inaudible voice, or is it like a voice in your head, or something you just kind of? There's something like just tugging at your soul a little bit on this, wasn't there?
Right. I didn't hear an audible voice like you and I are talking right now. There was this soul tugging, this internal knowing, this inarticulable feeling, right? That, you know what, there's something more to your life. But here's the deal. I couldn't ignore it. And no matter what I did, I couldn't ignore it.
Okay.
And I tried to at times, but I couldn't ignore it.
Yeah, you probably tried several self-sabotage acts and things that could have permanently changed the trajectory of your life. But then you moved to Nashville at age 19. And was that when your life trajectory changed on a different path?
100%.
Okay. What happened? How did you get to Nashville?
Well, I was studying music business. I thought I'd be an artist. I thought I'd be a rapper, and all this stuff, right? And so Middle Tennessee State had this extensive mass communication program, right? And so for me, that's if I just needed an excuse. I walked on that campus by myself. My parents didn't take me. They didn't go to freshman orientation. They didn't move me. I moved myself there, right? But I moved there, honestly, knowing I would never graduate from there.
Why did you think you would never graduate from there?
Because I didn't think I was smart.
Oh, okay.
I thought I was intellectually inept, right? Because I was held back in third grade.
Okay.
And then the following year, my teacher tried to hold me back again. My mom changed my schools. And so all throughout grade school, middle school, high school, I never thought I was smart.
So you had these beliefs about yourself, your identity.
That's
okay.
Right.
So I'm starting to understand a little bit more, but you did it anyways. Because you were trying to be something, you're trying to answer the call that there's something more for your life.
Yes. And I mean, I had this cognitive dissonance about my life. I didn't know what that was then, obviously, right? But it was, I couldn't reconcile what I felt inside, what I became cognitively aware of, and then the behaviors that I was actually exhibiting, in my environment.
Okay.
Right. And so for me, it was like, okay, it would be better to just leave and escape, right, than to stay and be a statistic.
Yeah, I got it.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long did you stay at Middle Tennessee State?
I stayed there until I was about 22.
Okay.
After my best friend left. Really, it was I was there to party, right? But the good news is I met some awesome people who helped change my perspective on some things. But when my best friend left, I fell out of love with the school, and I ended up dropping out of college like I knew I would, because I didn't think I had the intellectual abilities to finish anyway.
Okay.
But if somehow I could roll the dice and by happenstance I can accidentally graduate, I was cool with that.
Okay.
But it didn't happen.
So what happened? So what happened after that?
All right. So when he left, I dabbled for a minute, and then eventually I withdrew. I met with my counselor, and she said, "You know what, DeAngelo, you can always pick this back up.
Gave you an out.
It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You can always pick this back up."
Okay.
And so right around that time, my interest started changing. I started reading a lot of philosophy, theology, apologetics, and things like that, right? And I became an avid reader at that time, with about a particular subject, though. I just don't read anything. Like for me, there has to be intrinsic interest in what I'm reading, right? And so I did that for about 5 years. Felt like I hit the ceiling of my learning and sent out letters to mentors to try to ask them to mentor me, in this space, in this philosophy, theology space, right? I had one person respond, and he said, "You don't need a mentor. You need to move to Charlotte and study from the guy who writes all the books." And so that's what led me to Charlotte. Right?
Okay. DeAngelo, Did you grow up in the church?
I did.
Or were you aware of the church?
Yeah, I grew up in the church, but it didn't have any stick-to-itiveness in a sense, right?
Well, I guess and I'm sorry to cut you off. The reason I'm asking, because you said you're 22 years old and you go to age 27, you about 5 years just reading philosophy, theology, and apologetics books. From a kid from the streets to picking up these type of books, like draw that bridge for us. Like, how did that just become your interest?
Right.
And then how are you like earning a living during these 5 years while you're reading all these books?
So I was always a deep thinker.
Okay.
You know, even in music, I wrote songs like My Deepest Thoughts, Prison Minds, you know. And so I was always a deep thinker. I didn't know that philosophy was kind of something that would stick out, you know, later for me. And so when I moved to Middle Tennessee State, my faith got challenged, right?
How so?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, you know, Nation of Islam, right? Okay. You know, just, you know, that was one of the groups that challenged my faith and
challenge your Christian faith.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then even in class, right? I'd be in sociology class, and then the professor would do it, right? He would challenge it to the whole group, challenge Christianity as a whole. You know, and some kind of ancient African class, you know, the professor would do it, right? And so that started questions, you know, and so I started asking questions, and I started asking tough questions. My dad is a pastor, and I would ask him questions that he couldn't answer, you know.
Such as,
how do we know the Bible's true? How do we know Jesus exists? How do we even know God exists? You know, those kind of questions. And then, you know, at the time, he made me feel bad for asking those questions. I don't need to question God. I don't need to question the Bible. The Bible can defend itself, those kind of things, right? But I was dissatisfied with that. And that's what led me to the apologetics section.
Okay. Yeah. So you're searching for foundation, belief, and faith.
That's correct.
And so I asked you if you had grown up in the church, and you said, well, not really, but you're aware, but your dad was a pastor. What was your relationship with your dad like growing up?
Yeah. So he well, that's probably some of it, right? Is that, yeah, they drug us to church, but it wasn't a choice as a young kid.
Okay.
And then the older we got, the further removed we moved away from the church, right? And then our relationship at the time wasn't as good as it is now with my father, right?
So did this search through philosophy, theology, and apologetics strengthen your faith and what your core belief system ended up being or is today?
100%. 100%. I believe there are good answers for what we believe, and that's what I was looking for. Because here's the deal: if it's not true, I don't want to believe it. I don't want to believe anything that isn't true. You know, and so for me, I needed that. And my philosophy and apologetics even kept me during some of the most difficult times in my life, when my daughter was diagnosed with a brain tumor when she was 5 years old, and for about 15 to 30 seconds, I doubted God's existence. But my apologetics brought me back, because I realized that if I doubted his existence, then what am I going to do with my own? Yeah. Right? Because I had to give an explanation for my existence. And so,
DeAngelo, for our audience and those who may not know, can you give us a really brief overview of apologetics?
Yeah. So apologetics is a rational, logical defense for the faith. Right. And so because I was trained as a Christian apologist, then it would be a rational, logical defense for the Christian faith. There's obviously Islamic apologists and some other groups, but I was trained in Christian apologetics, specifically within the classical theological tradition and things like that.
Okay. But you said, was there a book or a writer on this mentorship topic that you alluded to and someone said you need to go learn from the guy who wrote the book on mentorship? So who is this guy?
Yeah. So it was Dr. Frank Turek and Norm Geisler. Dr. Norman Geisler was my mentor for many years before he passed. They wrote a book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Right. And so I was watching television one day in Nashville, and I saw Frank talk. And he was talking about his book, and so I sent out about 10 letters. I can't remember everyone that I sent letters out to, but Frank was the only one to respond.
Really?
And that was Frank's statement. You don't need a mentor. You need to come and learn from the guy who writes all the books, who we learned from.
Okay.
And so that's when I connected with Dr. Norman Geisler, and then after that, it was history. You know.
And so where was Dr. Norman Geisler?
At Southern Evangelical Seminary. He started two seminaries, and he started one here in Charlotte, and the other one is in California.
Okay.
Veritas International University or something like that.
So SES, Southern
That's right.
Evangelical Seminary.
That's correct.
And so he said, you need to come there. And so you moved to Charlotte to be mentored by him?
I moved to Charlotte to study at Southern Evangelical Seminary, and the byproduct of that, the icing on the cake, was that I get to potentially be mentored by Dr. Norman Geisler.
Okay.
You know, and so yeah, that's what I did. And as a matter of fact, Dr. Geisler had a lot to do with my move to Charlotte, because my dad and I were traveling from Nashville to Charlotte, coming to the apologetic conferences.
Okay.
Right. And so
was this something you were doing every year, or just...
we were doing that just about every year.
Wow.
Right. For a while. And then, so Norm, there was a friend of mine who was also a student. He said, just call Norm. And I said, man, I can't call him. What are you talking about? You know,
Yeah.
He said, man, just call him. You're a student. So I called. I left a message with.
This was after you were at SES?
I was
before?
I was an external student. I'm sorry, I failed to mention that. So I was studying in Nashville one semester.
Okay.
All right. And so my friend Harold said, call him. And I said, man, I can't call him. I come from these mega churches where you have to stand in the assembly line and you can barely touch the hand of the guy for 10 seconds, right? So I can't call Norman.
Yeah.
Called Norman, left a message with his wife, dear wife, Barbara Geisler, and he called me back.
Wow.
And he said, you know what? When you come to the conference, I want you to find me, and I'm going to take you and your dad out to eat.
Wow.
So he took us out to eat.
Where'd y'all go?
I can't even remember.
Okay.
That's 2008, maybe,
Wow. Okay.
2007.
Okay.
And so he took us out to eat. I remember driving downtown Matthews, right, in the back of a car saying, I'm about to move here.
Wow.
And so shortly after that, man, I moved to Charlotte.
And so you had not graduated from college yet. You graduated from SES, is that correct?
Graduated from SES, and just like the counselor said, and so what I had to do is all the work that I did at Middle Tennessee State University, I needed that because SES had you had to bring that into that school. You know, you had to have all of that general education done completely.
Okay.
And so I was able to transfer those credits into SES, and then I focused on a particular specialty within SES, and that's how I...
Which was what?
Apologetics.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
So and how long were you at SES?
Probably about 4 years.
Okay.
3.5, 4 years.
And what degree or degrees did you gain? And were they all at SES, or did you go to graduate school beyond there?
Right. So SES, I did their religious studies degree. All of it encompasses philosophy and apologetics. And so I did their bachelor's in religious studies and philosophy. And then I started their master's program in philosophy. And that's where something shifted in my heart. All right. You know, that's a different school. It's a different beast. People are very, very smart, you know, and philosophy is really heady. And so I remember being in a graduate philosophy course thinking, like, how can I use this to make people's lives better? And I was stuck. I didn't know how I could do it. I knew how I could use it, and I could be a great apologist. I could give a great rational defense for my faith, but I didn't know how I was going to take it and use it to make people's lives better. And so I withdrew at that moment.
While you were in the master's program?
While I was in the master's program. And then I went to Walden University to study social psychology.
Okay.
Right.
Where and was that an online course or a physical location?
So Walden specializes in online education. And so I went there and it connected all of it for me, right? I mean, it connected philosophy of mind. So it really helped me. It helped nurture that philosophical side of me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I understood how I could take social psychology and use it to make people's lives better. So I'm this weird conglomerate thing of, you know, philosophy, theology, apologetics, psychology, you know, which makes me.
And what you learned at Walden, as you connected those dots, is that what you're doing today?
That's exactly what I'm doing today.
That's what you're putting into practice.
That's correct.
And
I did 2 post-grad certifications at UNC Chapel Hill and one at University of Penn. in positive psychology.
Okay. And did Dr. Norman Geisler mentor you?
He did. So he did. He mentored me for directly. I mean, at his house, and so for about 6 to 8 months, I'd go over there and just ask questions. And I got to know him very well.
Yeah.
Very well. When I got there, here's the thing. When I got there, I wondered why no one did a movie or a documentary on his life. I'm like, man, this guy's incredible. For me, Dr. Geisler flipped a switch that I hadn't thought about before, and it was legacy. And so I would owe that to Norm Geisler, the idea of legacy and what I'm leaving behind. Also, what I got from him is this idea of expiring, not retiring, right? And so Norm actually expired doing what he loved. He never really retired. His kids had to stop him from traveling and from speaking. That wasn't even on his mind. He was still giving lectures, and he's 80-something years old, and you could tell he's declining. But for him, retiring wasn't an option, and I got that from him. And so for me, I don't see myself ever retiring. I'm going to expire, die doing what I love. But back to my thing about the Norm movie, when I was there, God put it in my heart that I would inspire that, and that I would actually shoot Norm's movie, right? And so I didn't know that I would go through these various iterations of myself and own a video production company. And then I pitched the idea to his son and David Geisler, and we started. Well, first Dr. Geisler decided he didn't want the movie done because it was going to cost too much. He had a stroke. We went back and asked him, and he said, "Okay," And so we started that process. I contracted people from the Billy Graham Association, and then I was traveling, doing interviews, and we were shooting Norm Geisler's movie.
Is that happening now?
It's already done.
It's done?
It's already done.
Is it out there?
It's out there. Now, one thing is I'm no longer affiliated with that project, but
okay. But you helped kickstart it and get off the ground.
Oh yeah,
that's great. I just want to pick on a couple things you said here. Yeah. So he mentored you for 6 to 8 months. Like, was that once a week, once a month that you would go over there?
Yeah. So Dr. Geisler mentored all his students in the classroom. He was very accessible to his students. And so whenever he was on campus, we all had equal access to him. And he mentored he made sure that he spent a lot of time because he felt like that he needed to develop leaders who train leaders, But in a more intimate way, yes, I went to his house maybe once a week. I can't remember exactly. I think it was about once a week. And I'd sit and talk to him and ask questions, and he mentored me that way.
So the form of mentorship, this is what I wanted to ask you, was you asking questions or him asking you questions?
No, it was always me asking questions.
Okay. All right.
I mean, if he asked questions, it was to get to know me more.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, and typically that's how it always is. And, I have if I could digress a little bit, I have a unique spin on mentorship. One time a person asked me, who am I mentoring? Right. And in a sense, I mentor all my students. Right. But I believe that mentorship best happens when the person who wants to be mentored seeks out the mentor,
when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah, I think the student, well, I don't know if that's a magical process, right? But the student needs to go, like all the mentors I have now, and I think you and I are going to get to mentorship, I hunted them down. And I had one question, what kind of return on investment can I give you to make you thrilled about giving me your time as a mentor?
That's really good. Yeah, so it's not just, it's not asymmetrical.
That's right.
You wanted to give it back to them. And what would some of those responses be?
Well, it would just to see you walk into your purpose, to see that what I'm giving you is actually, the time that I'm giving you is actually helping you become everything that your ideal self, and to help you flourish in the way that you want to.
How many mentors do you currently have?
Two.
Two people are mentoring you.
That's correct.
And are they several decades older than you?
I always seek out someone older. Someone wiser. I had tough questions, man. You're about to ask me some tough questions today, right? So Dr. Mark Leary he's a retired social and personality psychologist from Duke University, and so I meet with him once a week. And then Dr. Norman Cotterell, he's a clinical psychologist at the Beck Institute and specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy. And I meet with him biweekly. And so I've been meeting with them for a couple years. And
That's
and
great.
So those are the mentors that I have today.
That's great. You've sought them out and asked, would you mentor me and get in? Like,
Absolutely, 100%.
I don't know that enough people do that today. That's such a great practice. I had one person come up to me, who asked me to mentor them, and I almost felt inadequate. Like, I don't know that I'm ready to be a mentor. I don't have enough mentors myself. I'm going to meet with once a week. It's something that it's on my to-do list. I need to do more of. So I'm really fascinated.
Yeah.
I want to ask you like some of the questions you might ask, but I will tell you from like this asymmetrical concept. It's like when we were in these mentorship sessions with my mentee, it was like my most fruitful and rewarding meeting of the week.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
As a mentor to someone else. So I do think there's something to like see someone grow, see the light switches click on, see
For sure.
the ability to help someone else out on a one-to-one basis in a profound way can be very profoundly rewarding in and of itself. Just like there doesn't have to be something else kind of come back just other than like, hey, pay it forward. That
That's
sort of
right.
thing.
And I think that's what they're leaning into. And I'm a professor because of Mark Leary.
Okay.
He encouraged me that I could do it, and that he felt like it would, be a match for my personality and things like that. And so, for sure.
DeAngelo, what would be some questions? You said you asked them tough questions, and it's always you asking questions. Can you share what maybe a couple sample questions might be that you might ask one of your mentors in a session?
Typically, it involves some heavy psychology stuff, right? And so it may be that let's unpack a theory together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even the notion of identity, right? And so there are so many freaking theories in psychology, and sometimes I need help with those, understanding those, or even concerns I have about certain theories, right? Certain thoughts I have about, let's just say, evolution, right? And so it would be, it's all pretty heavy for the most part, you know what I'm saying? And then sometimes I have bad days, right? Like everyone else. And, my lovely wife does a good job of keeping me sound and motivated, all that stuff when I have these bad days. But a lot of times, it's hard to motivate the motivator, right? So I have friends and I let them know, hey, listen, I'm having a bad day. They rush off the phone with me sometimes because they're scared. They don't know what to say. Yeah. I can call my mentors and they know exactly, most of the time, exactly what to say, because they just have a little bit more depth.
I think there's also people need to hear that like it's okay to give yourself grace to have a bad day. Sure. No one's expected to have 100% perfection on good days or bad days. All right, that's great. Anything else on mentorship that you want to kind of? I feel like we've really kind of approached that topic pretty broadly and understand your experience with it. Anything else that you want to cover?
Yeah, for sure. Everything that I've become, like I used to be fascinated with this idea of being self-made, right? And then I realized that no one is really truly self-made. You're pieces of someone else, right? Or everyone that's poured into you in some kind of way. And so whenever I wanted to become something, I found someone who was that, and then I became that. If I could see it, right? And if I could watch them, then now that's that social learning theory, right? Observational learning could kick in, and then I could become that thing that I wanted to become. So when I become an entrepreneur, I found a mentor who was an entrepreneur, right? When I wanted to become a professor, mentor that was a professor, social psychologist. And so for me, whatever I want to become, I find someone who's doing it, and therefore I can become it because I could watch you, I could see you.
That's great. And why reinvent the wheel? Or maybe you're just going to just kind of slightly tweak it to your own flavor or what works best for you. But you've got a template then that you can edit off of.
That's right.
That's great.
A template you can edit. That's actually a good way of putting it.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So I love that you kind of embraced your calling, and that's what you through this whole study, and you became. And how many degrees do you have again?
So I have 2 degrees and a couple of certificates.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so for someone who didn't even think they were going to graduate college, you've got 2 degrees and you're a professor. Like that's the great irony, I think, of your life, right? You thought you'd be a statistic who didn't graduate college, but you beat the odds, like you said earlier, and now you're helping others beat the odds because you're a professor. That's right. Well, I'm sure you've got great stories of that where you see students and you help them turn around their own lives. Okay, let's stop right there on this topic, DeAngelo, and let's come back for the second episode, which will talk more about narrative identity. Okay. So thanks so much for listening to episode 1 of what we're called the DeAngelo Burse series.
All right, man.
Stories from the River.
Thanks for listening to Stories from the River. To check out more episodes, visit storiesfromtheriver.com. Join us again next week, and remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast.